Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you with us, and I'm going to facilitate this afternoon's session. My name is Stephanie Mullane, and I work in the Department of Theater and Dance, and I'm so excited to help facilitate this session for Hanne van der Iest, and who teaches in sociology, and I got to see some of this presentation or some aspect of it at Oktoberfest, and so you're in for a real treat. So I will let you take it away.
So Stephanie nailed my name, which is, it's a feat. Not many Americans do. So I'm Hanne van der Iest, indeed, and I work at the USC Columbia here in the sociology department. I'm an instructor here. Before coming to USC, I've worked at Emory and at the University of Groningen. I'm Dutch, as you can probably hear a little bit. So I've taught a variety of courses over there, lots of different formats, but primarily face-to-face before I got here. Because right now, I only teach Sociology 101, Introductory Sociology, in the asynchronous online format. So that's all I do, and I did that pre-pandemic. I should say about my course that I owe lots to the Center for Teaching Excellence and to the Office of Distributed Learning for helping me make my course what it is nowadays. So the CTE gave me an online course development grant, and that has helped tremendously with developing the course into what it is right now. And the Office of Distributed Learning for Distributed Learning, and specifically Rob, who's here today, has helped me, and Jeff Sword has helped me so much with the development of my video lectures and also with a faculty interview project, which I will talk about very briefly towards the end of the talk today. So just so you kind of know where I'm at in terms of like student enrollment numbers, I tend to teach four to 5 sections every semester, and each section contains 50 to 55 students. So generally in an average semester, or in an average semester, I teach 200, 220 students. It's gone up to 275 students. So I try to be creative with my course format, but there's limitations because obviously I cannot grade 275 essays every week. So within those constraints, I've tried my best to make a very interesting course for my students. And I'll be telling you guys about that today, in particular about multimedia course design. Okay, that's the title slide, but we kind of already had that. So we'll talk about multimedia course design for online courses in Blackboard, and let's go. So I told you a little bit about what I teach, and I and many of you will face this challenge. The general challenge is how to engage my students, right? There's a couple of particularly iffy points. One is that Introduction to Sociology is a Carolina core course, which means that I have very few people who have just been like waiting all their lives to take my course. I get almost no sociology majors, primarily nursing majors, exercise science majors, pre-med, business majors, and so on and so forth. And usually, not always, but usually students see my course as sort of a gateway into getting their major. So they know they have to tick the box, it's a requirement, and they have to get through. That does not necessarily make for the best environment for some inspired, engaged learning. So that is a challenge to surmount. And then in addition, this is a course that I'm teaching online asynchronously. So we don't have any class contact, like sort of face-to-face, not even virtual face-to-face contact, though I do provide the opportunity during office hours. We know that when you teach online asynchronous, the students are more likely to procrastinate, that they're more likely to lack attention compared to face-to-face courses, and that you really need to work hard to build community in online courses. And with the lack of community and sometimes like the feeling that you're a bit isolated, often comes a lack of a sense of obligation. All of these can be in the way of trying to get across your learning outcomes. Now, these will be unique to all of us. For me, there's 4 pre-specified learning outcomes that I got to stick to per the course catalog. But my personal one, the one that I care about most, is that at the end of the ride, I really hope that my students develop what we call a sociological imagination. That's not my term. But basically what that means is that what I hope is that my students are able to see how social forces, social structures affect individual outcomes, that it is not all up to our individual successes, our individual failures, our own merit and talent, but that where we end up in life is a complex interaction between what we put in and what kind of situations we find ourselves. So I'm trying to get that across. And here is sort of three main pillars of my course design approach, through which I try to make that happen. I try to captivate students by having a very clear course structure. And I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. I try to make sure that the content I'm providing them with is engaging, relevant, offered in a lot of different formats, all accessible. And I try to put high emphasis on community building in our classroom. And these are the three things I'll be talking about today. So first, on structure. I was already mentioning to Stephanie before we started the talk that maybe at the end of the talk, if you guys are interested, I can give you a Blackboard tour so I can show you what my Blackboard course looks like. But before going completely off script and giving you a tour, I figured I'd just point out a couple of the main points of how I structure the course. And then if we do a Blackboard tour later, you'll be able to recognize the various structures that I've laid out right now. So first off, important to note is that I have a modular course structure. Basically, I do a different topic every single week of the semester, or if I teach this in summer and do it in an abbreviated format, I teach one topic every day. Topics include things like race and ethnicity is a week that we do, sex and gender, social networks. We do one on education, marriage and family. So those are the sorts of topics that constitute modules. We have one per week, and every module looks in structure, it looks exactly the same. Obviously, the content varies a lot, but structurally they're the same, so that students know what's going to happen, know what the expectations are, and they focus on the content of the course rather than trying to figure out, what are the demands right now. Okay, so every single module consists of a component where I assign readings and materials. This can be anything. Can be podcasts, TED Talks, pop science chapters. I also make use of an online textbook that's an open educational resource. None of these resources the students need to pay for. So apart from the tuition that they obviously need to pay to gain access to the course, they don't need to pay a thing. I think we often forget that in our conversations about accessibility. Obviously, you want to make your course accessible for people with various different abilities, but you also obviously want to make it socioeconomically accessible. So I try to keep my course materials free. So the second component of every single module is lecture videos. I have lecture videos for every single module, usually about 3 to 6 per week. And each of these videos lasts between 5 to 15 minutes. I try to only address one broad topic per lecture and keep them short. I edited them down significantly just to make sure that you captivate students and you don't really go over their YouTube attention span. So in total, over the duration of the course, over the 14 modules, I have about a little over 12 hours of lecture. So that amounts to maybe 50 minutes of lecture a week spread out over these different little mini lectures. Then I also have weekly assignments for a week, 2 small ones, class participation, homework and a test, and I'll lay that out a little bit later. So I'll move on. This, what you see over here in a PowerPoint, is an example of how one module looks if you click it and open it. So we have a module overview over here at the top. So a one-line description of the topic, learning objectives, then a schedule that lays out, I have an enlarged version of the schedule that will pop up in a second. So I won't look at it yet, but you'll see the schedule up close in a little bit. But a schedule, and then I wanted you to see these 3 folders, right? Readings and materials, lecture videos, and assignments. And this is the structure that replicates every single module. So let's look at the course schedule up close a little bit. I am taking module 7 on social networks, social capital, and trust as my example module over here throughout, not just here, but throughout the presentation. So let's break this down. Every module overview will, of course, have a title. I also like to indicate during which time, which week the module is assigned. Then there's a section with reading and materials. Over here, you see 3 different things. It's always something different, but for instance, Christakis and Fowler at the top is a pop science chapter from a book called Connected. It's very interesting, highly recommend. Then is a New York Times article, Social Interactions Critical for Mental and Physical Health. We have a podcast. This one I find particularly interesting because the researcher who was responsible for developing the concept of social capital, Bob Putnam, was interviewed in this podcast. So they listen to that as well. And here are my lecture videos. I like to lay out in the beginning exactly how long every lecture is going to take so that students are able to block out that time in their schedules at the beginning of the week, or even if they want to, at the beginning of the semester, because I make all of these module overviews available right at the outset. They have access to them. Then here are my 4 assignments, and here are their deadlines. And over here, I have learning minutes. And I know Nina is familiar with these, and Lydia is familiar with these, and maybe all of you are familiar with these. But there's this very handy workload estimator from Rice University, and that will allow you to estimate how long it takes for students to process a particular piece of text based on its level of difficulty, which you can input yourself, and its length. This is the link. I can go back to this later. So this is where I didn't just come up with these learning minutes. They're based on a workload calculator or estimator. Okay, then I wanted to talk about assessment structure because, as I mentioned in the beginning, one of the big challenges in online classes is how do you make it so that students don't forget to study until it is time for an exam? And if you have an assessment structure where you have, say, midterm and a final, that can work very well in a face-to-face environment. I mean, there's loads of options, obviously, but in the online environment specifically, this tends to result in a lot of cramming. And I wanted to avoid that. So basically, in my course, there are no big exams. There is a final, but it is very small, and it only counts for 6% of their grade. Generally, they build up their grade week by week, module by module, every week, 7% of their grade. This is how that breaks down. We have 2 class participation assignments. These might be discussion boards, they might fill out a survey, or they might look at the faculty interview. I'll have a little sample of that later. They have homework. The homework is not timed, so they can open it, open up their materials, go through it at their own pace, and they have 2 attempts to complete 9 multiple choice questions. Try to do it like this so that they can learn from their mistakes and really take a deep dive into the material in order to prep for the test that they have every single week. The test is timed. They get about 2.5 minutes per question. There's 10 to 12 questions on the test. And the test will only be available for 2 days out of the week. There's a couple of reasons for that, but the main one is an academic integrity issue. Also, spreading out your assignments over the course of a semester rather than having a big midterm and a big final exam reduces the incentive to cheat as well. So that's another advantage of spreading out the load. Okay, over to the communication structure. So I try to be very, very upfront with what students need to do and what is expected of them in terms of assignments. I communicate with them often and I try to be nice. It says not encouraging. So I found that being a little bit ironic and sarcastic can backfire when people can't read your face at the same time. So I just try to be extremely nice. Always, you know, when students ask me questions that have been indicated clearly in the syllabus and in announcements, I try to assume that they have a bad day and just go with my best self. And this has worked very well in terms of not losing students, right? In terms of not making students feel disinvested in the course, because that's something that you can have very quickly, like, oh my God, that grumpy online professor. So we're trying to avoid that. Okay, as I mentioned before, my Blackboard site and the course schedule are available in advance before the course even starts. I email students 2 weeks before my course commences and let them know that it's open, available, and I tell them where to start in the course if they want to get a sense of how it's laid out. I send that email again at the beginning of the semester, obviously, so those who register late don't miss that information. Then, in terms of announcements and email, at minimum, I will email them twice a week, but more often, it's more often than that. So I definitely email them an introduction for every single module, and I'll email them a deadline reminder on the day that all our assignments are due. I include lots and lots of visuals and sometimes also videos in my announcements. That makes it much easier for students to find, all the information back. If there's a video or visual associated with it, it's easier for them to find it. And I'll show you in a little bit on my announcements page. And then I also, as I mentioned before, I give them surveys on occasion. So I will email them extensive survey digests addressing any concerns that they might bring up. I do surveys 3 times a semester. So there's a good opportunity for students to get back to me if they have concerns or trouble. Then, I mentioned that here as well. No, I don't. Anyway, student queries. So there's students have a lot of opportunities to get back to me as well. We have a Sociology Cafe, which is basically like an open discussion board where they can ask me any questions. If they want to ask something not in public, but private, they can obviously email me. And I have several open virtual office hours a week where they can drop by. And if they cannot make that or have a private concern that they want to discuss virtually face-to-face, they can make an appointment with me, and I schedule a decent amount of one-on-one appointments. I want to say usually about 5 a week, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, but 5 one-on-one appointments a week in addition to having open virtual office hours. Okay, so let me quickly back out of my PowerPoint and show you my announcements page so you have a little bit of an idea of how that's laid out. Okay, we're here. So this is my announcement page, and I'll just scroll through quickly so you have a little bit of an idea about the amount of visuals that I include. This is kind of what that looks like over here. So there I think like a couple of days ago, I included a video. I have a new puppy. I figured they might like to see the puppy. So I included a video that they could watch over here, me wishing them good luck. For time's sake, I won't share that with you, but it's so that's sort of my announcement page. So that is sort of the course structure. Now I wanted to move on to course content. As you saw, I include different forms of media, and I wanted to use this opportunity to give you one example of how I have communicated a concept, social capital and trust, have communicated that to my students in a variety of different ways. So importantly, with every piece of media that I assign them or reading that I assign them, I include a reading guide on Blackboard. So students are not sort of thrown into the material without knowing what they need to pay attention to. So I tell them, these are the terms I want you to pick up. These are the studies that you should know what the study is, and so on and so forth. And then also I have lecture videos in which I try to synthesize the main message that comes across in all these different pieces of media. So right now I'm giving you an example about the concept of social capital and trust. So for instance, here was a New York Times article that I assigned. The article is called Social Interaction is Critical for Mental and Physical Health. Obviously, this is a long article, but I wanted to pull out this one quote, which is Emma Sopala of the Stanford Center for Compassion and Altruism Research wrote, people who feel more connected to others have lower levels of anxiety and depression. Moreover, studies show they have also higher self-esteem, greater empathy for others, are more trusting and cooperative, and crucially from a sociological perspective, as a consequence, others are more open to trusting and cooperating with them. right? So I selected this article to show that social connections are, like sleep and eating and exercise, very important for our mental and physical health, but not just that, it's good for the health of others as well, and good for our trust in others. The next thing I wanted to show you is an excerpt from a podcast, economics podcast called Trust Me. This is an interview, so I'm just going to play it for you.
My name is Bob Putnam. I teach public policy at Harvard University.
Putnam is also the author of the landmark book, Bowling Alone, which was published in 2000. But he started thinking about social capital decades earlier. It began with a question about Italian politics.
Some parts of Italy are... way more efficient than any state in America, and other parts of Italy are way more corrupt than any place in America. And the question is, why? Why are some places better governed than others?
The answer, Putnam concluded, didn't have to do with economic development or education level or politics.
It was the degree to which there was a dense civic network in a community. If there was a dense civic network, so that people in those places behaved with respect to one another in a trustworthy way, their governments worked better. And I dubbed that concept social capital.
Okay, that's another way to introduce that concept. And then here I have a little bit of my video lecture on the topic.
So just to make sure we know exactly what we're talking about, if we're talking about social capital as a property of a group or as a property of a society, we mean that this society or group is relatively closely linked or has a lot of links in them, strong ties or weak ties, bonding, bridging capital, all of that. But there's lots of connections going on so that there's a lot of flow of information, a lot of flow of potential help, a lot of flow of material resources, and all sorts of other goods that people can distribute to each other.
Well, that's just a small fragment. I explained before that what bonding and bridging capital is and so on, but the term reoccurs over here. And that moves me straight back into community, because I have more on social capital, but I'll tie that into the community building aspect of my course design. So again, I have a lot of students, and not only do I want them to see my face lecturing to them and engage with the media I assign to them, ideally, obviously, you want students engaging with each other as well. And I do that in a couple of different ways. One is through the class participation assignments. And I have an example over here of an assignment that focuses on a demonstration of the power of social capital to my students. So I'll just read the slides with you guys. For this class participation assignment, we are going to simulate social capital and the power of social networks in our classroom. We all have things we'd like to know or have access to, and so we'll crowdsource your answer in our SOCY 101 community. Post one question to your colleagues. And some examples of questions that I give them are like, what should I know before I decide to enroll in a sociology minor? What's a good restaurant in Decatur, Georgia? Might someone have a lead to my dream internship? Is there a filmmaking workshop in Columbia, South Carolina? To which I would say, yes, there is. But in any case, they can ask anything. And over here is actually where the magnitude of my classroom is helpful. Usually it's not, right? Usually you want to give personal attention to students. But if you're trying to crowdsource an answer, then the more people there are in that crowd, the more opportunity you have to get to the information you want to get to. And so we get lots of questions, obviously, and lots of answers. I might not read both of these, I'll read one of these. So a student was asking, I've been thinking about getting a part-time job while in college. Does anyone know of anywhere that would be a good place to work at and not too stressful? And so another student replies, if you live in an apartment this year, you could see if your apartment building is hiring. I have some friends that work for their apartment buildings and they all love it because they are flexible hours. You don't need to drive or walk anywhere for work. And most buildings also give you a discount on rent. So we got that recommendation, and the student got recommendations to go see the Student Success Center for jobs, campus recreation. There were a list of restaurants and other places that were hiring at that moment that the student got. And so the student got access to a whole lot of information relevant to their request. So that would be an example. Then I have a different type of class participation assignment, which is where students watch faculty interviews that I have developed with 8 of our faculty members over the course of the last 2 years. So I assign about 1 every other week or so on average. And obviously students get to engage with each other again. They get a class participation assignment and they respond to the research program. Sometimes they share a personal experience or story, but not more importantly, but also important is that this is a different type of community building where they see, hey, look, we're here with a bunch of students. We're here with our Sociology 101 teacher, but we're also part of the broader sociology community here at the University of South Carolina, right? And so they see some of our professors, and our professors explain to them what courses they teach and what the research is focused on. And hopefully, this gives students also ideas for any potential electives that they might want to take later on. Now, I've pulled out a couple of seconds fragment from Professor or Dr. Matthew Brashears, who is assigned in our module on social networks and trust, just so you can see a little bit of what these interviews are like.
It would probably be, you will always benefit from having a better understanding of how people work in groups and how society functions. And the basic reason for that is, regardless of what you see on TV, regardless of what you might, read in books, regardless of what you might have, heard from your parents, nothing important gets done by individuals. Everything meaningful happens in groups. Every great scientist who made a difference had people working with him or her and was in contact with others. Everyone who built something built it with other people. And if you don't understand how to work with other people, then it makes it hard for you to accomplish anything important either.
Okay, so that was his takeaway. And there were many, many other sage ones. So another example of how you can build community in large online classes. Okay, well, I think I've talked for a long time, so I just wanted to leave you with this one sentence, one-liner takeaway. Let me read it. Clear course structure, engaging content, and building a class community are key, at least in my case, if we want students to meet our learning goals in asynchronous online classes.